Well, hi, everybody. This is Pastor Scott Seidler, and today is another opportunity for us to enjoy a Shepherd podcast, an opportunity for us to meet with community and national thought leaders and pick their brains and pull on their heartstrings to understand better ways in which the ministry of the gospel can impact specific people, specific groups of people in refreshing and innovative ways. Today, I'm joined by Dale Kreienkamp, a dear friend of mine going back many, many years, but also an author and thought leader in the area of ministry to the unemployed. And so I want to welcome Dale, welcome, and give you an opportunity to share a little bit about who you are and where you come from and how you got into this ministry to unemployed.
Well, Scott, thanks. It's good to see you again. Wish we were sitting across the table from each other. This is the next best thing, and it's wonderful. Technology allows us that. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here and share a little bit about my passion. So you asked about background. My born and raised here in the St. Louis area, blessed to have a wonderful wife of almost 42 years, 3 amazing sons, 3 spectacular daughters-in-law, and blessed with 5 of the world's greatest grandchildren. Nothing better than that. Professionally, my background was in human resources. So I've been a human resource executive or a consultant for over 40 years. And in that journey, I was blessed to be on both sides of the equation. So I helped an organization at different times in our life as we wrestled with how many employees we needed and how do we deal with reshaping our organization. And then twice in my life, my position was eliminated. So I was on the other side of the spectrum. And it was out of that experience that I said, there needs to be a tool out here. I don't find one that helps people to understand and validate the emotions that they experience and help them understand where God is, because it's a really difficult time when your job is taken away from you. Mm-hmm. And so the first time I was unemployed, I didn't think a lot about it. I mean, I thought about it, maybe did a little bit of writing. It's 15 years later when it happened the second time, it was like, okay, Lord, there must be something in this for me. And I dug out the writing. It was terrible from 15 years earlier, but we worked to fix it and were able to publish a book in November of 2018.
Awesome. You know, I always found that interesting, Dale, knowing that you not only had the experience of losing your employment, losing a job twice, but you as a human resource expert were also on the other side of the table. And just maybe reflect a little bit, what is that like being on both sides of the table, and especially staring across the table and knowing that in many cases, because of your job, you had to put someone into a state, you had to disemploy somebody. I mean, so just talk about that psychology, because that is fascinating to me. And then how you got to writing this book. So just talk about that psychology a little bit.
Yeah, so within my profession, our job, I always like to say in human resources, is we're the advocate for the employees, but we're also the advocate for the organization. And that puts you sometimes living in 2 different worlds. On the one hand, you're doing everything that you can to protect jobs, help people grow in their jobs and do better. And yet sometimes, based on what's going on in the economy or based on what's going on in a relationship, it's not going to work for somebody to stay employed. And it's at that point in time that we have to shift gears and say, how do we deliver the news? How do we handle this process with dignity and respect for the person? And how do we help them move on and bridge the opportunity for them to whatever they're called next to do? Right. Not an easy thing. So going through it, I never expected anybody to pick up the phone and call me and say, gee, thanks, Dale. You did that really, really well. If you're looking for that, it's never going to happen.
Right.
At the same time, we really did the best to respect and handle with as much dignity as we could. How we went through the process and with care and respect for them. And then on the flip side, then you're living the world that you knew other people were going into. And so you have to ask yourself then, how am I a living example of how to handle such news and how to be an example as a Christian for others? Because people are looking. They're looking all the time. So how do I do that, and how do I respect that? That's the other part of the process.
You know, there are doctors who are, very well trained in oncology, dealing with people and addressing the medical needs of people with cancer. But the doctors that themselves have actually gone through cancer are even more capable and expert in what they do. And that's one of the things I've always appreciated about you in this journey of writing your book, How Long, O Lord, is that you came not just as an expert theoretically in the profession, but you brought a very practical experience from both sides of the table. And I think that that is just an amazing thing that you then translated into ministry. Before we get to the ministry side of things, just take a couple minutes and talk about the big picture, both of unemployment generally and unemployment specifically in this time of pandemic.
Wonderful question, because I think people often, especially in the last few years where we've had a robust economy, have really misunderstood how big unemployment is in the country. Mm-hmm. If we take a look over the last 10 years, so the 10-year average of people that lose a job that they didn't want to lose, so they didn't walk in and say, hey, I quit, I'm retiring. This is somebody coming to them and saying, we no longer need you. So it's either a layoff, job elimination, a discharge of some sort. That 10-year average is 21.7 million people a year. Now, let me give you an idea of what 21.7 million is, because we kind of get lost in this world of how big that is. That's equal to every man, woman, and child that lives in the state of Florida. Or if you're in the Midwest like I am, it's every man, woman, and child that lives in my state of Missouri and the two bordering states, Kansas and Illinois. Add them all up, you've got that 21.7. And if we go out west where you are, start with Arizona, and you've got to add, I think it's 6 more states. You would add New Mexico, Nevada, Montana, Colorado, Wyoming, and Nebraska to get to 21.7. So that's the norm that we go through. And to give you another perspective point, every year in this country, about 2.6 million people die. About 1.7 million people are diagnosed with cancer. Wow. So just think about that compared to 21.7. Now let's talk about COVID, because COVID-19 2020 is completely set everything on its ear. Today we have over 40 million people that are unemployed. So it's already twice what it's been, which is equal to every man, woman, and child living in the state of California that sits near you guys.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of people that are out of work, that are going through the struggles of saying, what's next for me? And a lot of them saying, God, where are you in this process?
Right. Right. And you know, that reality, I mean, I got goosebumps actually just thinking about the implications of what you just said, because in the church, I know as a pastor for 25 years, you know, I focus so much on dying, you know, being with people who are going through a grieving process for death, walking with people who get the startling diagnosis of cancer. But, you know, the statistics you just shared with me go right to the fact that it's even more pervasive, that people are going to walk through a season of unemployment, and the church should have a strategy for helping, because our vocation, what God gives to us as our vocation, our professional, pursuit in life is very deeply held. It's a matter in some ways of spiritual life and death. That's a little aggressive, I know, but your point is we need to take seriously as a church the fact that when a person becomes unemployed, they're going through a very spiritually significant journey, not unlike someone who may be going through cancer or even through a dying process. Again, different context, I get that. But again, your words and those statistics are really startling for me and make me feel even more compelled to take more seriously unemployment in my ministry environment.
Yeah, there's good news, bad news to it, Scott. The good news is unemployment isn't fatal.
Right.
Cancer can be fatal. Death is,
Yeah.
but it's a grieving process that people go through.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the challenge that pastors face is the unemployed don't necessarily pick up the phone and call and tell you that they're unemployed.
Right.
And so you don't automatically know who's all unemployed. Whereas when someone is dying, they usually reach out to the church, or if someone has cancer, they reach out to the church. Unemployment's just a different animal, and people don't do it.
Right.
But in terms of your point, I'm so thankful to hear you say it. Yes, the church should be the ideal place to reach out to help the souls that they're dealing with. And through it, it can be a spiritual awakening for people.
Sure.
As we move forward.
You had mentioned yesterday, as we were kind of pre-meeting on this podcast, the novelty of being furloughed. In other words, there's getting the so-called pink slip and saying you're no longer employed here. But we're at a time right now in this pandemic where a number of employees are being, quote unquote, furloughed for a time. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so furlough is the technical definition behind furlough is you are removed from employment, but you're still an employee for a period of time. So we've said we're going to furlough you for, let's say, 90 days. We believe things are going to pick up in 90 days and we will be able to bring you back to work. Whereas if I'm laid off, you've permanently eliminated my position and I no longer have a job there. I think that term furlough, and because so many people are being furloughed, I think people are really kind of not understanding the impact that has on someone.
Right.
So when I'm furloughed, folks, I'm out of job. I don't have a job. I don't have an income, and I don't have a guarantee that I'm going back. So let's take a couple of quick examples of what that might be like. Let's say I'm furloughed from a hospital because we don't have as much elective surgery going on these days. So I've been furloughed, and we think 90 days from now, I'll be able to come back. Or I'm a university, and because we haven't had students on campus, we've furloughed the staff.
Yep.
Well, that's based on things then calling everybody back is based on the conditions returning to where they were. And we don't know that they're going to return to that. So in the hospital world, those elective surgeries, people may continue to push those off because they say, you know what, my knee hurts, but I don't think I want to go into a hospital right now. Schools may not be able to reopen if we're not further along on this process. And then those furloughs become permanent. So the person who's on furlough is dealing with all the emotional issues that somebody who permanently did. And they've got that awkward situation of, I've got hope for a job, they're going to call me back. But what if they don't? Should I have done something in this time period? Right. You know, if 3 months from now you make it permanent, then I'm sitting there saying, boy, I wish I'd have known because I'd have spent the last 3 months looking for a job. So they're really caught in the middle, but they are just the same. They're unemployed.
Well, Dale, thanks again for being on this podcast. Just to take a short break, and then we want to come on the other side of the break into a conversation about that spiritual journey and what it means to go through it, and what are some insights that you gleaned through your life, both practically and in your expert leadership in human resources, to help people along with those moments of unemployment or being furloughed or somewhere in between. Well, we're back again with Dale Kreienkamp, and we're talking about what it means to minister to those who are unemployed. And ultimately, we're also going to get to part 2 of this podcast, which is ministry to the family and friends and support network to those who are unemployed. Dale, we just got done talking about the context and the nature of unemployment, especially in this pandemic time in America. I want to now do a deeper dive into the emotions and spirituality of people walking through unemployment. So just talk a little bit now about what it is that are some of your main nuggets of insight when it comes to helping people spiritually navigate these days of being furloughed or unemployed or even underemployed.
Sure. Great. Thanks. I love the question. I would say there are 7 kind of emotional issues and challenges that people go through when they're unemployed. And it's in each of those that there's an opportunity, and yet everybody's going to deal with it a little bit differently. So some are going to struggle more in one area than they are in another. But everybody's going to deal with them, but they don't necessarily want to admit that. So we'd like to admit we're still in control. And that becomes sometimes the challenge. So let's start with one of them that is why you as a pastor may not hear from people. They are often feeling embarrassment and shame. They just lost a job. They feel like they let themselves down, their family down. They really did nothing, but they've lost their job and they're embarrassed. It's kind of like, when you were in high school and you got cut from the baseball team like I did, I didn't come home and pick up the phone and call my 25 best friends and tell them I got cut from the team. Yep. You kind of keep quiet about things like that. And so you're a little bit sensitive, thinking everybody notices you've lost your job and what's wrong with you. So there's a long story behind this, but I have this hat that says unemployed guy. And we could talk a long time about it, but when you're unemployed, you feel like you're looking around and everybody sees the hat and it's like, oh, look at him, he's unemployed, and They know it, even though they don't. It's how we feel. And the other part connected to that is loss of identity. So if you and I didn't know each other and we met for the first time, one of the first questions we'd ask each other is, what do you do? And you'd say, I'm Scott Seidler. I'm the senior pastor at Shepherd of the Desert. And I would have said, I'm Dale Kreienkamp. I'm the head of human resources for, and then all of a sudden when you're unemployed, it's like, well, what do I have?
Right.
And so we really struggle with our identity and we forget it. It's not about who we are, it's whose we are. Right. We're God's children, and that becomes an important foundation that people need to remember as they go through the process.
I like the fact that in your book, How Long, O Lord, Devotions for Unemployed People, I mean, you really get at a lot of these different emotional angles that people have as they're walking through unemployment.
One of the most validating things, Scott, that I get is when people have read the book and I see them or they send me an email, they usually say, you put into words everything I was experiencing, but I didn't know how to say it. And that's important because when you're unemployed, you kind of feel like you're all alone and nobody really understands where I am.
Yep. And the reality too is that, again, that's why at the beginning of this podcast, I talked about, how much I appreciate you're both an expert, but also a practitioner of having walked through this. Mm-hmm. And so again, you can't just talk at a distance to people, trying to really figure out what their emotions are and what they actually are going through, as opposed to what you think they're going through.
So one of my dreams, I'll be honest with you, Scott, is that pastors across the country are also going to have my book, that when they find somebody, they're going to make sure they put it in their hands. And not everybody that receives it is going to read it instantly, but it's there for them. And their spouse can better understand what they are going through, because that's a huge thing for the spouse. They sometimes don't understand.
Do you find, Dale, that there is, and I'm always cautious of being stereotypical, there are many different personality types that cut across gender, that cut across generation. But as you think about ministry to folks that are walking through unemployment, are there different nuances that you have found that apply more to men or more to women, or more toward unemployment when you're in your 50s as opposed to unemployment when you're in your early 30s? What have you found, and what is your experience in that regard, especially relative to spiritually supporting those who are unemployed?
Um, so I've seen that people that are unemployed of all walks and all types of jobs talk equally about the emotions. I think the difference is sometimes people want to use it as what I'll call an accountability group. So if I'm unemployed and I'm with three other people so my background was as an executive, if I'm with three other white collar workers, it's probably easier in that situation for us to be accountable partners for each other because we're in a similar world. Yeah. It's not impossible, but it becomes a little bit easier in those that were but that's not the end of the world. The unemployed people just talk to unemployed people.
And personality does cut across all of that demographic, difference. And I get that. It's just so important, isn't it, just to be sensitive to the individual, because everybody is going through an individual experience of unemployment. They are not just, especially in this time of pandemic, 40, just a nameless person in 40 million people who've lost their jobs in the past 6 to 8 weeks. These are individuals. Their hearts are unique. Their pain points are unique. And for us to be sensitive to that unique experience is really a way that we show lavish care.
Yeah, and Scott, your point about individuality is so important, because when people are unemployed, they want to compare, but it's your race. In fact, the very first devotion that I have in the book is about your race, and the quote from Scripture about, I run the race that's marked out for me. And
so good.
We have to not compare with each other, because it doesn't if I'm comparing, let's say you and I did relatively similar work and we're both unemployed and we're looking, and you find a job in 2 months and I'm still looking at 6. Does that mean there's something wrong with me and something right with you? No, it's really no different. But when we compare, that happens. So it's really important not to compare. This is your race. God's going to open the door at the right place in the right time. It's not an if question. It's a when question and a what question. When is the door going to open and what's going to be there for me? And it might not look anything like I imagined, but God has an opportunity in store for each of us.
And it really goes back to that point of control that you mentioned earlier. We by nature as human beings, we like to control a lot of our lives. And when we are out of control, now we are essentially walking fully in the will of God. And so we're not going to be irresponsible or lazy in our pursuing a new job or a career or whatnot, a restart for our employment. But at the same time, there is a great amount of faith that has to be had in order to know that God is leading our lives and he will never leave us nor forsake us. And I love that vision from Hebrews of running a race and knowing this is your race and God is faithful to it. Dale, anything else as far as insight goes for those who are right now walking through unemployed before we wrap up this first part of our podcast and get ready for our second?
So let me just quickly walk through some of the emotions that you're going to experience in some manner, way, shape, or form. Some of you may deal with anger. When something is taken from us and we didn't make the decision, there tends to be anger either at the circumstances or the organization or the person. So anger comes in. Fear and worry are there, because when our brain can't figure out what's next, it tries to figure it out. And when it's asking questions that there aren't answers to, because fear and worry about what might be, not what's happened. And people go there. So they're going to deal with fear and worry. Self-confidence is going to go up and down. This is kind of like a roller coaster. So when you get good news, your confidence is up. But bad news, it tends to drop. And the longer that you're looking when you're not having success, that impacts your self-confidence. So, Scott, I know that I'm a lover of basketball, so I grabbed one and brought it along here. If
Go Pelicans, right?
Yep. If I'm a basketball player and I miss the first 7 shots of a game, I'm going to hesitate about taking the 8. Well, the longer I am without success, the harder it is on my self-confidence, and people are going to deal with that. Loneliness comes in because I've lost the community of people that I worked with. I love the people that I work with.
Huge.
And so when you walk away from that community, you're often a lot by yourself. Now, we've kind of told everybody to stay in place with your family, but even then you're still probably dealing with some loneliness or some isolation. You're going to have some conflicts on your time. This is unique. You've got more time on your hands than normal. And so you're caught with, I'm looking for a job, but gosh, I've got time that I don't normally have, and I could do something I've never had time for. So when you're searching for a job, you say to yourself, why the heck am I not enjoying it? And when you enjoy it, you say, oh my gosh, am I missing out on a job opportunity because I'm doing this? So there's a real conflict. And the last one, which is the hardest, is despair. You will have days of despair, feelings of hopelessness, when there's no wind in your sails. Those are tough days, and everybody gets them. The key is, how do you keep from having a day become 2 days in a row, become 3 days, become a week, become 2 weeks? That's the hard part of the journey.
And to realize that, the core of our Christian faith is forgiveness and second chances. And that the God who watches over our lives and walks with us through this time of unemployment is also the God to whom we can turn and say, I've been angry. I've been lashing out at my family. I've been lashing out at my friends. I've been isolated. I've been giving myself over to unhealthy habits or whatnot. And to know that each and every day that we wake up is a new day for God's grace to work in our lives and for us to make a restart. You do lose your way. But God says, in my life, in my world that I've created, my world is a world of second chances. Dust yourself off and let's go, and know that I have never forsaken you. I've never left you behind.
Yeah, and He wants us in the present. I always wish that when I was going through that journey, that the Lord's Prayer said, give us this day our quarterly bread, because it would be nice to stretch it out further. But He doesn't. He wants us focused on today. And that's just hard. And so that's part of a journey that people go through, to fight and try and control, and then finally accept, I can't do this, God, I need you to do it. That's where He wants us, is back knowing that everything that we have comes from Him. That job came from Him. Those gifts we have came from Him. It all comes from Him. And this is an opportunity to get closer to Him again.
Yeah, and I like that image too, that you make lemonade out of lemons. And sometimes an opportunity that comes along where you are now unemployed allows you to take a step back and take stock of maybe some of the unhealthy things that were going on during the hard driving, hard charging time of your employment, and to say, you know what, I need to get some counseling. I need to get healthy. I need to lose some weight. I need to eat healthier. And while I'm not employed in a vocation, I am going to take seriously my vocation of caring for myself and being a healthy human. And that itself is a kind of employment, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I like to use the analogy that a local speaker here in the St. Louis area, John O'Leary, talks about. He met somebody who said, I was working on climbing the ladder, and I realized too late that I had it leaning against the wrong wall. And sometimes unemployment is an opportunity for us to pause and go back and say what really matters. And what really matters the most is not only our faith, but our family, our friends, and those things that we sometimes lose sight of. I know I have. I mean, in many ways, Scott, the book is my admitting of all my own failures, because, yeah, we've got them. But just as you talked about, we have a God that says, I forgive you. Let's get back in the game. If I'm for you, nobody can be against you.
Yeah, ministry is that, Dale, isn't it? It's a recognition that as we go along and we help people who are struggling through their own desert places, it causes us to look inside and behind us in our own walks and journeys and those desert places that we've come through. And not necessarily to make amends through our ministry, but to conduct our ministry in a way that has awareness and wisdom, experience behind us. And I really do appreciate your efforts at putting all of that wisdom and experience into this ministry. In your book, How Long, O Lord, in the allied materials that go along with it. And as we make our way forward here, I look forward in our second part to listening in on your coaching. And that's really who you are as a coach, coaching for families. Because if I'm doing the math right, I'm not a mathematician, 21.7 unemployed over 10 years on a regularized basis, 40 million today. That means that in all likelihood, there's at least another 80 million, not 120 million, if everybody has 3 people that they're super connected with that are probably being affected by this unemployment. Yeah. And now we are at nearly half of our country that is walking through unemployment, not just those who aren't making a paycheck anymore.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, hey, thank you, Dale, for this first part. Thanks for all the ministry that you do. This is Pastor Scott Seidler, Shepherd's Podcast. So great to have you all with us. We'll look forward to seeing you and hearing from you again soon.